Okay. Matthew 27, the actual crucifixion. But first, we have some unfinished business to take care of. Early in the morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people came to the decision to put Jesus to death. They bound him. This is another trial, I guess, or maybe a follow-up to the previous one. Led him away and handed him over to Pilate, the governor. When Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 silver coins to the chief priests and the elders. I have sinned, he said, for I have betrayed innocent blood. Apparently, he wasn't expecting Jesus to be put to death. Or maybe he just, when John will say that Satan enters into him, maybe Satan leaves him and he regains his senses and realizes what he done. I don't know. I just don't know. We just don't get a lot of insight into Judas's thinking. What is that to us? They replied. That's your responsibility. So Judas threw the money into the temple and left. Then he went away and hanged himself. I don't know if he was hanging himself out of despair over what he had done, I guess, or maybe in his mind he was trying to make an atonement for it. But he's dead. He has taken the bad way out. Peter denied Jesus, but Peter didn't hang himself. Peter eventually came back. Judas could have come back too. Jesus' act of forgiveness is for everybody. It's not like Judas is the only one who's ever betrayed Jesus. Lots of people have. But Judas did not take that option and instead hanged himself, and that was it for him. The chief priests picked up the coins and said, "It is against the law to put this into the treasury, since it is blood money." Now, of course, this is not all chronological. All these things would have taken some time to process. He would have had to have thrown the coins in the temple, then gone out to hang himself. They would have had to have heard about him hanging himself. Then they pick up the coins. So, we're not necessarily telling all these things exactly in the sequence in which they happened. It's against the law to put this into the treasury, since it is blood money. So they have to use it now for something. So they decided to use the money to buy the potter's field as a burial place for foreigners. That is why it has been called the field of blood to this day, because it was bought with blood money. I don't know where this field is now. Now, in Jeremiah is instructed to go to the potter's gate, to go get a pot from the potters and take them outside the city. We'll actually read that in a moment. And break the pot that he buys. So there was a gate, a potter's gate, where they tossed out their shards and broken bits of pots. I don't know where the potter's field was. Apparently it was a place where they had a lot of holes because they used it as a burial site. This is why it has been called the field of blood to this day. The day of Matthew's writing this. Then what was spoken, so they had some kind of, apparently it had been used to bury pot shards or whatever, which means it would have already had a lot of holes in it like cemeteries do. So they just use it as a now burial site. Then what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. They took the 30 silver coins, the price set on him by the people of Israel, and they used them to buy the potter's field, as the Lord commanded me. This prophecy is actually in Zechariah. Let's go to Zechariah 11. Zechariah 11. Zechariah is near the end of the Old Testament, so you only have to flip back a few pages. Not very far. Zechariah 11. Hey, Cap, you're bothered by that weird noise out there, aren't you? Stop that. Okay, so Zechariah 11 is a story about Zechariah trying to be a sheep for the people, and the people a shepherd for the sheep, the people, and the people reject him. The flock deserted me. Then I took my staff called favor and broke it. This is chapter 11, verse 10. It was revoking the covenant I had made with all the nations. Okay. I told them, verse 12, if you think it best, give me my pay. But if not, keep it. So they paid me 30 pieces of silver. And the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, the handsome price at which they priced me. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord to the potter. That's actually in Zechariah. Matthew attributes it to Jeremiah. Jeremiah has a few instances of talking about the potters. I mentioned one a moment ago, so let's go to Jeremiah 19 now. Jeremiah 19, this is what the Lord says. Go and buy a clay jar from a potter. Take along some of the elders, the people, and the priests, and go out to the valley of Ben-Hinnom, near the entrance of the potsherd gate. There proclaim the words I tell you, and that's when hell becomes hell. We've read this story before several times about what he's going to do in that valley. What they've already been doing in that valley, and then what God is going to do in that valley now as recompense for that. But he doesn't actually have a specific quotation that Matthew talks about in terms of that particular price of potter's field. Then he actually buys a field in Jeremiah 32. And he goes out to go get it, and that's when he gets in trouble. Jeremiah 32, verse 6, Jeremiah said, the word of the Lord came to me. Hanamel, son of Shallum, your uncle, is going to come to you and say, buy my field at Anathoth, because as nearest relative it is your right and duty to buy it. Then, just as the Lord had said, my cousin Hanamel came to me in the courtyard of the guard, and said, buy my field at Anathoth in the territory of Benjamin, since it is your right to redeem it and possess it. Buy it for yourself. I knew this was the word of the Lord, so I bought the field at Anathoth from my cousin Hanamel, and weighed out for him 17 shekels of silver. I signed and sealed the deed, had it witnessed, and weighed out the silver on the scales. And then he talks about, so he doesn't have a specific mention about buying a potter's field for 30 pieces of silver, but he does have references to pottery and potsherds, and buying pots and then buying a field. I'm not entirely clear why Matthew attributes that specific prophecy to Jeremiah. It's possible Jeremiah actually did say it, but for some reason it didn't get included in his written records. Because we've said before that the prophets spoke before they wrote. A lot of the prophets never wrote at all. Quite a few prophets came along and were only speaking prophets and did not ever write anything down. And even the ones who did write things down spoke before they wrote. And their written message was basically a summarized version of their spoken message left for future generations. So it's possible that Jeremiah said that, and in Matthew's day it was known that he had said it, but he did not, for whatever reason, end up writing it down in his book, and Zechariah did. I'm not sure. Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, are you the king of the Jews? Yes, it is as you say, Jesus replied. Now, this is a very abbreviated version of Jesus' encounter with Pilate. We'll read more about it in Luke and John. If Jesus claims to be a king, this alone would normally cause Pilate's censors to go up, because, of course, this guy would then be claiming to be a rival to Caesar. And Matthew himself doesn't really explain why Pilate doesn't do that, doesn't react that way. Matthew wants to put the emphasis on the Jews for their responsibility in condemning Jesus. So he doesn't really talk a lot about Pilate, and he gives us a very abbreviated version of Jesus' appearances before Pilate. But we know from Luke and John that there was more to it than this, and Pilate questioned Jesus enough to know that he wasn't actually a threat to Caesar. But this alone would seem to indicate that he is, because he's claiming kingship, and so he's claiming a position that would be a rival to Caesar. So the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Yes, it is as you say," Jesus replied. When he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, I don't know what they're accusing him of here in this context. We'll read a longer version of this in other Gospels, that they were charging him with blasphemy, of course, which is something that Pilate really doesn't care about, because he doesn't care about Jewish blasphemy laws. He does care about a potential rival to Caesar showing up. And they do mention that as well. And in John, eventually that's what they get him on, as they work the crowd over and say that Caesar is going to get mad at Pilate if Pilate doesn't kill Jesus. But none of that is really referred to here. Then Pilate asked him, "Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge. To the great amazement of the governor, there's that silence again, that sheep before her shearers is silent, so he will be silent in front of his accusers. Now it was the governor's custom at the feast to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. I don't know how long he'd been doing this. Pilate himself was only going to be governor of this area for about 10 years. And he was not well liked by the Jews, and he didn't like them. They didn't like him, and he didn't like them. So it could be that after a few years, again, he's only there for like 10 years total, and it could be that after a few years of hostility, one of the ways he tries to pacify them is to establish his custom of releasing a fan favorite prisoner every year at the feast, just to get on their good side, at least for temporarily. So again, Pilate himself is only going to be there for about 10 years, and he may have only had this custom for a portion of that time. Who knows? We really don't know. But apparently he had a custom. I don't know if it was Pilate's particular thing or what, of releasing a prisoner chosen by the crowd. Remember that the Romans didn't need a lot to imprison people. Okay, it's not like it is today, where you're supposed to go with like a formal investigation and all that. I mean, they I guess may have had some investigations, but if they didn't like you, they would imprison you. I mean, it's like they didn't need a lot of justification to throw someone in prison. So they could and there were a lot of crowd stirs. I mean, Pilate is fearful of a riot for a reason, and the chief priests earlier were fearful of riots for a reason. It's because, well, they were prone to rioting. Okay, this is not an unfounded fear. So they had rabble rousers and shit stirrers in their midst that would be taken into custody, presumably just to get them out of trouble. But so the idea of like releasing one of them every so often to please the crowds and get them to hate Pilate a little bit less makes sense. Now, it was the governor's custom at the feast to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, now there's an ancient tradition. I'm not sure. There's some Bibles will have a footnote here. This one actually doesn't. But longer study Bibles will have a footnote here saying that there's a manuscript tradition here that Barabbas' first name is Jesus, and there's an ancient tradition that his full name, this man's full name, was Jesus Barabbas, and Jesus would have been a name. I mean, it's basically the name Joshua from the Old Testament. So it's not like that name would have been forbidden for anyone. We don't go around just naming people Jesus these days. I think in some cultures, like in Spanish culture, you still see the name Jesus. But Jesus itself is basically just the name Josh. And so there's an ancient custom that this guy's name was actually Jesus Barabbas. So when Pilate is talking about them, he's making a distinction between one Jesus and another. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you? Jesus who is Barabbas or Jesus who is called Christ?" That's how I read it, because I think that's actually probably what he said. For he knew it was out of envy that they had handed Jesus over to him. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat. So Pilate knows enough after, again, Matthew gives us a very abbreviated version of this. Pilate knows enough after hearing from Jesus and hearing the chief priests to know that this is all hocus pocus. This is all malarkey. So he doesn't actually want to condemn Jesus to death because he has no reason to. Now, Pilate's not a good guy. Let's not give Pilate too much credit here. This is not a good man. This is not a man with a good history. Okay, this is a bloodthirsty Roman governor who had no problem causing the deaths of innocents. We've read, we'll read about a reference to other problems that the Jews had. Pilate mixes some of their blood with their sacrifices. Like, Pilate was not a good guy, and he was not a good governor. He was not a friend of the Jews. They didn't like him, and he didn't like them. But he does have a man here in front of him who is clearly not worthy of death, according to any legal rule of Roman law. And he doesn't really care about these blasphemy charges the chief priests are bringing up about Jewish law. And so it's a little tough for him to just say, okay, kill this guy. He will do it. I mean, he will do it. But his initial reaction is to say, why? Why kill this guy? While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." Always got a cat around. Oh boy. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Always have to deal with cats. What are you doing, cat? Okay. Always gotta deal with cats. But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. These are the same crowds, apparently, that were cheering for Jesus, and the chief priests themselves feared just a couple days ago. I don't know if this is happening early enough in the morning that the majority of the crowd hasn't gotten here yet. What are you doing, cat? Will you stop that? I don't know if they have paid them off. I don't know if these are people that are associated with, if the priests themselves have filled the oh gosh. Goodness gracious, cats. I don't know if the chief priests themselves have filled the square with their own friends and relatives and sycophants to drown out the voices that may have been, supporting Jesus. I don't know. I really don't. But somehow or another they did it. Somehow or another they managed to persuade the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they said. "What shall I do then with Jesus who is called Christ?" Pilate asked. They all answered, "Crucify him." Now this is exactly what the priests didn't want initially. They didn't want to do this during the riot, during the feast. If they had done it their own way, they would have taken him outside the city and stoned him somewhere without anyone knowing about it. They didn't want it to be a public event like this. "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him!" When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead a riot, an uproar was started. It could be that a few people got started, and then after that, just mob mentality took over, which that happens, certainly. But that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." All the people answered, "Let his blood be on us and on our children." We hate this guy that much. Then he released Barabbas to them, but he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. Again, this is an abridged version of the story. We'll read a more detailed explanation of what happened in Luke and John. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and they twisted together a crown of thorns and set on his head. This would have been some sort of tumbleweed or thorn bush that would have been blowing around that they got. It is not, we often think of it as one of those circlets that goes around the head like this, but it probably wouldn't have been. It would have been a cap, because that's the style of crowns that they had in that culture in that part of the world at that time. So it would have been like a cap that would have sat down on top of his head, not just a ring that goes around the head. That's how we portray it in our artwork, but that's probably not what it actually was. They put a staff in his right hand and knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. They spit on him and then took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. Remember, he's got that crown of thorns still on the head. So they were beating that crown of thorns down into the head. Remember in Isaiah 52 we read about in the last video that he was disfigured with his figure was disfigured beyond appearance. That's what probably did it. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. Now these are brutal Roman soldiers. They had heard about this King of the Jews thing. They don't believe it, of course. They had heard the King of the Jews mentioned in this conversation with the Pilate and the chief priests, because they don't believe any of that. They don't care about any of that. And if there ever was a King of the Jews, they would kill him. I mean, that'd be their job. If there ever was a guy coming along thinking King of the Jews, they just kill the dude. So they have no reason to respect this guy at all, and so they don't. They mock him and then they beat him. They have some fun. That's human brutality. I mean, humans do this. I mean, we had an incident here in the St. Louis area just a couple weeks ago of a bunch of teenage girls getting into a fight, and one of them crashed the other's skull against the sidewalk pavement a number of times until it literally cracked. Because that's just what people do. When you get worked up and you're out for vengeance and you're out for some fun, you're out for some good old-fashioned butt kicking, that's what you do. As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. My guess is that Jesus, having already been beaten and lost a lot of blood, was too weak to carry the cross. It's possible he stumbled and fell. So at some point along the way, now we do read in the other Gospels that he did carry his own cross at least for a while. So my guess is that he made it part of the way, probably stumbled and fell at some point. Or maybe he was just moving too slowly for them. Maybe he was just going too slow. But at some point along the way, they got this guy out of the crowd, probably a bigger, stronger looking fellow than most, and made him carry the cross. Now this dude, from what I can tell, will end up becoming a Christian later on. Now this dude is from Cyrene, which is in Africa, and he probably would have been in town for the Passover, because Jews were supposed to go to the temple, the Jerusalem, for the Passover. That's probably why he was here at this time. Now he, living in Africa, probably would not have known anything about Jesus, because he's not from the area, and probably doesn't really have a clue what's going on. He just happened to be there that day and got dragged into this. Mark, as we read earlier, specifically identifies him as the father of Alexander and Rufus, indicating that those men are known to Mark's audience. And we will read at the end of Romans, which is written, of course, to the church in Rome, where Mark is identified as being from or being around at that time. We will hear Paul refer to Rufus, chosen in the Lord, and his mother. So it's probable that this Simon of Cyrene became a disciple of Jesus after this. And they forced him to carry the cross. They came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Probably because it was shaped at least somewhat like a skull, a mound or a hill, something that had some kind of mound or hill shape to it. It's outside the city. There they offered Jesus wine to drink mixed with gall. But after tasting it, he refused to drink it. This would have dulled his senses. And apparently he wanted to be fully awake and alert and aware of what was going on during his suffering. When they had crucified him, they divided up his clothes by casting lots. That the words, but we have a footnote down here saying that the words spoken by the prophet might be fulfilled. They divided my garments amongst themselves and cast lots for my clothing. That's Psalm 22, verse 18. We'll read from Psalm 22 in just a bit, so keep that thought in mind for the next video. And sitting down, they kept watch over him there. Above his head they placed a written charge against him. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Now these are the men for whom the spots of Jesus' right and left had been prepared. Remember when the sons of Zebedee and their mother came to Jesus asking to be granted places on his right and left? When he came into the kingdom? In Matthew 21, grant that your sons, that one of these 2 sons of mine may sit at your right and the other at your left in your kingdom. And he asked them, can you drink from this cup? And they said, we can. He says they can too. Now they won't drink from this particular cup, but they will suffer for his cause. So they will end up drinking from his cup in later days to come. But he also says, to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those to whom they have prepared my Father. These are the 2 guys he was talking about. This is what it means for him to come into his kingdom. And when he's doing that, he's surrounded by criminals, probably members of Barabbas' gang. He's probably taking Barabbas' place on the cross. But Barabbas is probably intended to be on the cross that Jesus ends up being hanged from. Probably. And these 2 guys on the other side of him are probably Barabbas' gang. We don't know that for sure, but it's probable. One way or another, these are the guys that he was talking about that have been prepared to be on his right and on his left when he comes into his kingdom. Because this is how he's coming into his kingdom. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, you who are going to destroy this temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God. In the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders mocked him. He saved others, they said, but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross now, and we will believe in him. They wouldn't. Even if he had done that, they wouldn't have believed in him. But they're saying that. They wouldn't have. I can guarantee you they would not have believed in him, even if he had done that. That's just how human psyche works. But they're saying that. They're mocking him by saying that. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants him. For he said, I am the Son of God. In the same way, the robbers who were crucified with him also heaped insults on him. Now, one of those robbers will come to his senses after a while. My guess is that they were both trying to get him to get off the cross and save themselves, too, at the same time. My guess is. We'll read about in Luke that one of them repents. One of them apparently does not.